I wanted to talk about the precision of a radial arm saw. Now the radial arm saw has a lot more adjustments on it than your average saw. So there's just a lot of clamps. So there's a clamp down here that controls the bevel. There's the yoke, which is a twist left and right. There's a clamp up here, which adjusts the arms that goes left to right. I guess there's this clamp, but doesn't affect things. There's, you know, the clamps for the fence, so squareness of the fence is affected there. So there's just all these clamps on the particular saw that can affect the actual accuracy of the saw. The other thing is just the general design of the radial arm saw. And maybe I'll talk about that right now. So, you know, one thing that makes the radial arm saw kind of really nice to use is that you have this really long arm and it pulls out on it. But this arm is actually quite a bit of work to work with. So if I just take, you know, this wrench here and just say this is my radial arm saw, so I've got my extension and my hand is the collar and I'm holding on to it, right? So what the question is if the column is too loose, this can sag and there's just a lot of play in there, it doesn't work. So if you tighten it up real tight, then it freezes up and then it won't slide up and down. So there's almost like this Goldilocks, you know, just right amount of clamping force that you need to maintain in the collar, such that this will slide up and down, but then this also you have this huge snug fit. And the other thing is this arm is 30 inches long from the center of that column to here. So what you have is you have this incredibly long torque arm, which is basically longer than this handle. So just in general, and how do you adjust to it when you make a miter cup? You release the top clamp and you turn it. So when you're moving this thing around, you're actually putting an incredible amount of pressure on those particular clamps. And actually, I'd say that this is the worst one, that there's not much you can do with that. There's just so much torque that you're applying on there that it can move the blade left and right. Now what that means is that, you know, there's every time you move this arm, there's a chance that you're knocking the saw out of square, which means that this saw needs to be tuned regularly, because if you move the arm, you move it back, there's a chance it's going to move on you, which can create a lot of issues with people. They just throw this like, oh, this saw sucks. And then, you know, if you want a saw that just, you know, you set it up and it doesn't move on you, this isn't your saw, just because it's a, you know, 30 inch, you know, torque arm on this thing, and just slowly there. There are other forces here too. So I think I brought this up on another one. This blade sits out of center, so when it cuts, it's lifting up when it's doing the cut, and then it's also pushing. You know, if it lifts up a little bit, there's also a little bit of push to the side. So over time, that force could actually move the saw out of square. Now the other thing too is the saw is vibrating. So just in general, because you have all these clamps, over time, and then when I say over time, people buy a 1970 radial arm saw and it's 50 years later, they're like, oh, this thing's, you know, not square. Well, you know, there's been a lot of vibration, and the question is has that actually ever been tuned? So I think just in general, if you're going to go after radial arm saw, you have to adjust your mindset. And I wanted to highlight this book, which is called Fine-Tuning Your Radial Arm Saw, which is, I think, is probably my favorite book on the radial arm saw. Now, the good thing about this book is there actually is a digital copy, so you can look at it, but I actually find this book valuable enough that I've actually purchased it. And I'm thinking about maybe going through each one of these steps in some videos to actually take people through these. But I would suggest that, you know, go ahead and download the PDF copy and read through this if you're a radial arm saw owner. I think it'll really help you understand, you know, how to get the most out of your radial arm saw. Anyway, what I mostly wanted to do was say, hey, this is pretty challenging, and you know, that's a torque arm, and over time, all those torques will actually affect things. Oh, there's one other thing I did want to say, which is, you know, people talk about, you know, stability of a saw. So over time, you know, the consumer ones, they move these to aluminum. And people complain about aluminum saws over the iron ones. Now the thing about the iron ones was that they're more stable. What does that mean? It means that they absorb more of those vibrations. So what that does is it means that the vibrations have less effect over shaking loose, the clamps over time. Does it mean that they last forever? I don't know. Maybe if it's heavy enough. But I think the thing too is the aluminum saws aren't necessarily well, it's a trade-off. I mean, I looked up one time. I think the lowest weight original saw, which is kind of based off the old DeWalt's, those were 500-pound saws. This saw, I think its shipping weight was 175, and a lot of that was the MDF. So they got a lot of the weight out of it, which is cost. But then on top of that, if you're a consumer, do you want to be moving a 500-pound saw around? So those are those trade-offs. So it doesn't mean that the aluminum saw is necessarily, never going to be able to do work. It just means that it is going to be subject to more of that vibration, and that means that you're going to have to tune it up more than you would a heavier saw. Anyway, to give me just a precursor to this book, I just think it's it's pretty eye-opening in what it means to do precision work with a radial arm saw. So if you're interested in doing that, I suggest you read it. It's good to look up if you wanted to tune your saw. I think it's got good information. But anyway, that's all I have.